Hello, everyone. G'day, as they say in the valley. Bonjour and kwe. So it's my turn to share about Algonquin Park and its surrounding region. And my motivation is to do this through a discussion of space and time. And from that, I would argue that by knowing our past, we can have a better understanding of our present. And through monitoring that, we have a better chance of envisioning what's going to be happening in our future and better able to adapt to what unfolds. That will not only help us continue to foster good nature conservation, as we've seen here in Algonquin Park, referred to already, park established in 1893, the first provincial park in Canada. But it will also help us begin to get ready for the change that's coming in our future and be able to adapt in a way that will make us more sustainable in the choices that we make both as individuals, as business, and as a society. Algonquin Park is, as we heard, is large. It's 7,600 square kilometers of extensive forests, rivers, lakes, and wetlands. It's located in the Great Lakes St. Lawrence Forest region, with Georgian Bay to the south and west, and the Ottawa River Valley to the north and to the east. It's also highly in a densely populated area, particularly to the south, in and around the Great Lakes, and the cities in the Ottawa River Valley, including Ottawa and Montreal at the mouth. So there's a great challenge here to how to think about conserving this place moving into the future. Oops. Oops. Okay. Help me here. The Algonquin Park is located on a dome of called the Algonquin Highlands. And being on a dome, it is the source of many rivers, 10 in total, flowing out in all directions. When Algonquin Park was established in 1893, it was in part to protect the source waters of 5 of these major rivers. The Amable North flowing north to the Ottawa River, the Ox Tongue flowing south to the Muskoka River and on into Georgian Bay on Lake Huron, and 3 rivers, the Petawawa, Madawaska, and Bon Cher, all flowing east into the river. And I'll be coming back to the Bon Cher. Of course, I will be calling it the Boncher, because that's what locals call it around here. In the 1800s, as we heard, the development approach was to lease large areas of land to timber barons who would clear cut the forest and float the logs down the rivers in the spring flood. And in opening up the land in this way, it was then followed by settlers who homesteaded and farmed. And in 1893, when the park was established, it was in part to prevent this kind of practice in this area, because it was causing flooding in the spring, drought in the summer, and generally degraded water quality year-round. Along with the rivers in the park, there are also many lakes that were formed from the retreat of the Ice Age back 11,000 years ago. And in this area, glacial till has been particularly important in terms of defining settlement patterns and vegetation. And most of that till is good for forests, but not very good for agriculture. But in addition to soil, it is also climate that is causing the kind of vegetation that we see here in Algonquin Park. Being on a dome, it is colder than its surrounding areas, typical of the Canadian Shield, which extends on up into the north, into Quebec, and also down into the Adirondacks in the southeast US. There's also a precipitation gradient that occurs in the park because of higher elevations in the west and south and prevailing weather patterns, which cause heavier precipitation in that part of the park. And with lower elevation in the east, it tends to be drier as well as warmer. And these climatic factors combine with local site conditions to influence the vegetation patterns that we can see on this Landsat photograph. In particular, the broadleaf trees dominated by sugar maple and red oak, shown here in red and orange, are primarily prevalent in the western and southern parts of the park. It's the conifers, the greens in this photo, that dominate in the north and in the east, including dense stands of red pine and white pine that are characteristic of the sandy glacial outwash plains. Along with a diversity of habitat and a diversity of climate, you also get a diversity of animals. In Algonquin Park, there are currently 500 species recorded. Of these, about half are birds, my favorite. And of those, about half are known to have bred here. Of the 47 species of mammals, it includes many of the iconic ones for which Algonquin Park was established and continues to be well known, including the moose, black bear, beaver, and coyote, as well as the birds that breed here, common loon and pileated woodpecker. But if we were to think about animals in terms of their weight per hectare in the park, it would actually be the invertebrates that would be the most impressive, shown by the gigantic caterpillar here in the lower right corner of this image. And they are large because there are so many of them. Isn't it lucky that of the thousands of insects in the park, that only a few bite? And compared to those insects, the wolf and moose and deer, moose and a bear are actually relatively small because there's so few of them. But the climate is changing. Over the last 60 years, the Algonquin Park region has actually increased in temperature on an annual basis at about 0.5 degrees Celsius. And that change in temperature is causing a change in biodiversity that we've been detecting, a shift in species distributions, also affected by changes in vegetation related to changes in forestry practices. But in terms of species breeding, species of birds breeding in Algonquin Provincial Park, of 120 species or so that have been tracked, 80 species are now arriving earlier in the spring, and 31 are leaving later in the fall. So we have a longer breeding season here, coincident with an increasing temperature, annual temperature in this region. But by 2050, shown here on the left-hand side of the graph, the temperature in Algonquin Park is projected, based on global circulation models, to be increasing by up to 3 degrees centigrade. And it's going to get wetter, about 6% wetter, based on modeling. So what does that mean for biodiversity, for wildlife, for trees? Based on modeling from global climate change projections for a set of 280 species occurring in this area, we expect that by the middle of this century, about 20 of the species, those species, are going to be changing. 10% as a result are going to actually be gained. So these are going to be new species to the park. But 10% are also going to be lost. Both of these factors resulting as a northward shift in species distribution as a result of changes in their climatic envelope. So change is coming. What are we going to do to get ready? It's hard. The first thing is we have to measure to manage. It's hard to track incremental change. It's easy to sort of die the death of 1,000 cuts. So the first thing we have to do is to establish our baseline and monitor for change. I would suggest that a good place to start is to deal with our wildlife, water, both in terms of levels and flows, and its quality. In my home watershed, the Boncher, we initiated a community-based monitoring program 5 years ago to talk with residents about what their concerns were, and then to begin to survey and track changes in stream condition, shown here in different colors among different catchments. What's worrisome to us, although not to everyone, is that half or less of the catchments that we've surveyed so far are only in good condition. The remainder are in poor or fair. Why that is, we don't really know for sure. That work is ongoing, to be continued. Other things that we're doing is a collaborative initiative with other stewardship organizations in Renfrew County to establish a biota base, crowdsourced by people who are out there looking, interested in mapping and tracking the flora and fauna of our home place. We've also initiated a collaborative, community-based Nature in Your Neighborhood initiative. It's involved field excursions, raising public awareness through public presentations, newspaper articles, blogs, performing art and visual art exhibitions of our place, the power of which we've seen today, creating a video series of local stewards talking about the place that they care about that will be airing on community cablevision, and lastly, creating a guide of nature in your neighborhood around the Boche River watershed that will be launching shortly. But in addition to raising awareness, it's important that we also begin to think about how that future might change, but that's daunting. There are so many choices. How do we actually put that together? And so we've been working with residents to engage in a conversation about what it is that they're concerned about, what might be influencing the way that the watershed develops, and what those alternative futures might look like. Out of that conversation has emerged two main factors that are likely to affect what's going to happen in this area. One has to do with the level of local engagement in decision making. Are we well engaged, or are we going to be governed from away? The other factor is whether we use a short-term or a long-term perspective in the decisions that we're making. From those two factors, we created 4 stories or narratives of what the watershed might look like by the time we get to the middle of this century. But as we know, a picture is worth 1,000 words. And so we worked with a local artist to visualize what each of those futures might look like. And it has given us a vehicle, a means to engage people in a conversation, people of all ages, local governments, and other decision makers about the choices that we make and what that may mean. For example, in the What Ours Is Yours future, it's sustainable in that we're managing the resources is being developed for green energy production, but largely from policies and programs that are from outside. And it's, in the process, been alienating residents. In the Great Divide, we have a separation with affluent families having the means to live in estate lots in the upper reaches of the watershed around the lakes and rivers of the Precambrian Shield. But it's been at the expense of the lower reaches where agriculture has become industrialized and it's now a mega dump for people's waste. In the entrepreneurial boom, more local engagement. The economy is doing well. Green energy development, construction, recreational tourism, but unfortunately appears to be happening at the expense of a degraded environment or of environmental quality. And lastly, there's the new rural, characterizing local engagement, not only local engagement, but a long-term perspective decision making. With that kind of a framework, it would appear that we're potentially able to retain the best of rural living with wise investments in conservation of natural and cultural heritage and a reasonable attitude about levels of posterity. Well, with our futures in hand, we're now in a position then to evaluate what that might mean in relation to things that people value. On the left-hand side, this is what people told us they care about. water quality, environmental integrity, good governance, wildlife and biodiversity, family farms, family enterprises, youth opportunities, and a rural identity. And as you can see by arrows going up or arrows going down in relation to individual futures, it makes a difference which choices we see unfolding. Are we going to be engaged? Are we not going to be engaged? Are we going to use long-term perspectives or short-term? And that'll influence the way things are going to develop. But it also raises a question around the choices not only that we make as individuals and businesses, but how we govern ourselves. And so in the Boncher, we've been spending some time trying to understand who's talking to who about what around the environment. And what's shown here is that the provincial actors and the county actors have relatively large spheres of influence because of their mandates and the nature of engagement that they have with other actors in the watershed, particularly some of the townships. But what you can also see is that there are actors who are relatively small, and they're on the periphery. And so our challenge is going to be, given an uncertain future, is how do we engage a more fulsome level of discussion and conversation around the environment so that we'll be in a better position to be resilient, including to a changing climate. So in closing, what I hope I've persuaded you is there's some value in knowing our place, understanding our presence and monitoring for change, thinking about what the future might be and what those consequences might be, and using that as a way to think about how we want to adapt the choices we make as individuals, as businesses, and as a society. It will not only result in sustaining places like Algonquin Park, but also the home place of each and every one of us. These are our watersheds. We need to invest in them. My family's been here for 7 generations. What future will you choose? Thank you.